And you need to tell your son or daughter, like, you are just another employee here. You don't own the business. Yes, it's your family's business. Yes, you should tell me if you think people are doing things unethical, they're stealing, they're doing things wrong. You should come and report that to me. But don't act like you are entitled because it's not your business. And so they need to learn the, you know, they need to learn what most any other employee would need to learn.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, and this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. According to the Family Owned Business Institute, there are 5.5 million family owned businesses in the U.S., employing 63% of the workforce, that's about 98 million people, and accounting for 78% of all new job creation. Yet, precious little attention is paid to the differences between family-owned businesses and larger publicly traded companies, especially the small to mid-sized firms that account for the majority of family businesses. Strategy, risk tolerance, management style, and even succession planning are often a reflection of a family owner's style, but can also be volatile as different family members exert their influence on the business. My guest today is Jonathan Goldhill, author of Disruptive Successor, a guide to driving growth in your family business. Jonathan grew up in a family that owned a large business and now helps prepare the next generation leaders of family businesses to lead and scale their firms. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Jonathan.
Thanks, Mike, for having me on the show.
My company, Imperative, is a family-owned business. My wife and I started the company 23 years ago, and we're both actively involved on a day-to-day basis today. She handles all the number stuff, and I handle all the talky stuff. And that's just kind of how we've divided labor, and it works pretty well. But sometimes our family issues do bleed into the business issues, but generally we're a pretty good team. Do you actually see family businesses that are as dysfunctional as like the Roy family on HBO's Succession?
Mike, I don't think I've ever seen a family that was as dysfunctional as the Roy family. As a matter of fact, I thought this would be a great show for me to watch and get some takeaways and learn how to manage really challenging family issues. And after watching one or two episodes, I was so disgusted by the people on that show that I thought, this is not a show that I want to watch. I'm more familiar. My situation with clients is more like Marcus Lemonis, the prophet,
Yeah,
who
it's
walks
great.
into family businesses that need to be, fixed because there's a lot of family dysfunction. And that's more similar to the situations that I walk in. But those people are even more desperate because they need capital to expand usually.
Right. I love The Prophet. In fact, my youngest son, who's a senior in high school now, and even when he was in elementary school, he and I watched every episode of The Prophet as they came out. And he and I took a trip to New York together and just visited in the city a lot of the actual companies that were featured on The Prophet. And we even met some of the owners and stuff just by walking in and just meeting them. And it was really interesting. And almost universally, everybody we talked to had a really great experience with the show and working with Marcus afterwards. So I think that's really good. So we hear about family business. How do you define a family business?
I would say two or more family members that are involved in the management, ownership, or leadership of the company. So a lot of family businesses are husband and wife, like your family's business. Some of them have the next generation, which is really who I work with, which is younger. Typically, my clients are millennials, but they could be any age. So we still see a lot of boomers who own businesses and they have their children involved. And fewer businesses make it into the third and fourth generation, where they really have built a legacy and it's a multi-generational business. But I would say that, if you look also at public companies, surprisingly enough, there's a large percentage of them that are still family owned and controlled. So
Walmart, right? Walmart's a great example. I mean, yeah,
absolutely.
right.
You don't
Yeah.
see it so much in what I call the sexy industries. So tech, SaaS subscription, software as a subscription type business models. You don't see too many of the modern businesses that were created in the last 20 years being family businesses when they have enormous needs for capital and they're growing. I mean, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, those are for the most part not family businesses. I find most family businesses are in what I call unsexy industries. They're in the biggest one being real estate development, real estate management, property management, construction, all the subcontractor trades, plumbers, roofers, landscapers, electricians. Plumbers, interestingly enough, seem to be like fourth generation type businesses because plumbing, like, can anyone here name a school that you'd go to learn plumbing? I think this is stuff that you learn through your father, who learned through his father. That's what I've seen of every plumbing client I've worked with.
And so there are obvious, some of us start businesses to just provide a certain kind of lifestyle for our family, or like in my case, where you just can't get along with anybody else and can't work don't fit in a corporate environment very long. And then there are businesses built to create a legacy. Um, do those do people tend to be intentional when they're starting these businesses about, I want to create a legacy, or I just want to maintain, a decent lifestyle for my family, or how does that tend to develop?
I don't know what the research that would support the answer to that question, but my guess would be that most people who start businesses, and we know from Michael Gerber, who wrote the E Myth, was that most small businesses were developed by default, not by design. It's really the entrepreneur that develops a business by design. So, and again, any one of these former companies I was just mentioning previously, those were companies that were, for the most part, built by design. I mean, Airbnb being a little bit of an exception, by the way, because that was kind of an accident. If you know the story behind it, they needed to basically they just started renting out their rooms, which was near the Moscone Center in San Francisco, so people could use it as a crash pad for some consumer or trade shows that were happening at the exposition hall. And then they came upon like this could be a business idea. But I think most family businesses, as are most small businesses, they're started because an entrepreneur either says like you, like I'm not going to work for these jerks. I don't want to work for anyone else. I got to work for myself. And so they start making some money, a side hustle. Maybe it becomes a full time thing, and they see it right away. Other people just recognize there's an opportunity here, and they start to exploit it. But I think most of them are saying, this is something that I could make money at and I could have freedom. I think entrepreneurs start businesses because they want freedom. Uh, they want fortune, but they're first thinking probably like, how can I make money and control my life? And then only do they, once it's successful and they've developed a niche and they've put some maybe systems in place, that business starts to become repeatable and they can even start taking more time off. Do they start thinking like, this is something that could be expanded into the next generation, adding employees, adding the next generation. I mean, think about it. The next generation, for the most part, is probably 20 to 30 years younger than yourself or than anyone who started the business. So it's a long time to become a success. And by the way, a lot of companies, Starbucks as an example, Apple by examples, these were not overnight success stories, or you could say they were 25 years in the making. So it took that long before they really started to scale. And so you look at any of our businesses, by the time you're into the second decade, you're really starting to figure out how this thing can work and work without you. And that's when having the kids involved or having them help you to make it work without you is really a powerful proposition.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a member of the Entrepreneurs Organization, EO. And so, here in Fort Worth, we've got about 100 members. And so I've got 100 friends who own businesses with, exceeding a million in revenue. And I can tell some folks are just, you know, this is great for me. I've got, but there's no plan for the company to exist when they retire. Especially wealth management folks and folks like that. I see a lot of those guys who, when I retire, I'm hanging it up, and the entity won't exist. And then I see others. In fact, I think of a friend who's got a wealth management company who's brought his son into the business, and the son's taking over now, and there is that longer term plan. And as I get more and more gray, or I'm wondering, we're beginning to have those conversations with our financial planner about, okay, what's next? How do we exit this, or do I even want to? Because what else am I going to do? I get to do whatever I pretty much want to now,
Yeah.
and so why would I forego that the return I get on the investment and enjoy the challenges? So it seems like every business is a little different, but I imagine once you have more than just you and your wife, or just a spouse and and their spouses owning a company, you get into some unique challenges as other family members get involved. Can you share any what kind of challenges a family owned business with more than just one or two members might face?
Sure. Let's take the first challenge, and this is true of any entrepreneurial company as well, but particularly in husband and wife businesses, which is, do you have a second in command so that you can? Right now, for most husband wife businesses, the spouse is the second in command. But what happens when the two of you want to go away on an extended vacation for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or you want to travel in an RV or whatever you want to do? You want to, but you're going to disconnect from the office. Do you have someone who is really in charge that can run the business in your absence and will make really good decisions? And these are things that second gen family business members really are. They're well positioned to be a really good second in command because they've been around the family business for so many years. They know what their mother or father would do if their mother or father were there making those decisions, and they make decisions accordingly. So, but this does require someone who's a mature adult. So, would I, Mike, if I were you, would I leave my business in the hands of a 21-year-old? Not unless he thought like a 31-year-old or over. But if he thought more like a typical 21-year-old, probably not. And so I think having a second in command is a first critical thing that anyone needs to develop if they're going to be able to step away. And a second and related thing, and possibly somewhat of a substitution for the second in command, is having really good documented systems and processes so that when you leave, the recipe is still being cooked the same way in the same proportions. For by analogy here, if you have a restaurant and you don't have a good recipe and you don't have measured proportions, you could go away for a month and find out that those third pound hamburgers, the cooks are now making half-pound hamburgers for everyone, and you could watch your food costs go up without realizing it. So, a good recipe, set of systems and processes, and a good general manager, second in command, whether it's your child or a key employee, super necessary.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, premium background checks with fast and friendly service. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. And that's business credit for HRCI certified professionals. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 32 and enter the keyword family. That's FAMILY. On March 10th, I'll be hosting a webinar entitled What to Do When an Employee Gets Arrested. We'll discuss the policies you need to have in place before you get that call from an employee's spouse that, well, he won't be in today. and how to fairly evaluate whether an arrest has any relevance to the individual's role in the organization. This free webinar is approved for 1 professional development credit for SHRM certified professionals and 1 hour of general recertification credit for HRCI certified professionals. You can register for this free webinar at imperativeinfo.com. And if you're listening to this podcast after March 10th, you can still watch the recorded webinar on our website for credit for free. And now back to my conversation with Jonathan Goldhill. Like I said, my youngest is a senior in high school. And so 10 years or 9.5 years ago, I put a 10-year plan in place so that when he goes off to college, it's wheels up. Whatever I have to do for the company, I can do from anywhere in the world. And we implemented EOS. And so we're operating to that process, and we've got documentation, and there are precious few things my team needs from me on a daily basis. And so it's taken a lot of work to get to that point, and I've got a great leadership team that surrounds me and make sure that everything gets executed. But that's the only way I'd ever have any freedom to do all the things that we want to do, once we're empty nesters.
Yeah, well, EOS has taken the entrepreneurs organization by storm.
Yeah.
Little backstory on that: EOS's competitor, which is known as Scaling Up.
Right. I know I've met Vern several times. Yeah.
I'm sure, but for the listeners, like Vern Harnish is the founder of the entrepreneurs organization EO, and the founder of Rockefeller Habits and Gazelles and Scaling Up, and that's what's being taught in the curriculum in EO across the globe. I know because I was an EO member myself. And yet Traction, EOS, that methodology is taking EO members by storm because it's simpler. And it really does put some of an operating system into client companies. I use it with my clients. I use Traction tools. I'm a big fan of it. It's a really simple operating system that helps puts basic processes in place for how to manage the company. Really important.
Yeah, and I've helped nonprofits that I've been a part of implement EOS, even HR associations, and I recommend all our employees that are coming in read What the Heck is EOS, so that they've got a trainer on it. They don't have to absorb the entire Traction book, but just it's tab A and slot A on how to run your business, and it's genius as far as I'm concerned, because there's nothing in there I haven't read before, and in Jim Collins or Michael Gerber or anything else, but he puts it. Gino Wickman just puts it in a really easy to follow format, and it's on the list. I've got a list of I think 6 books that anytime somebody tells me that they're starting a business or they're a young emerging entrepreneur, I give them this list of books and say, hey, here's what I would have read 23 years ago if I'd known about them, and it would have made my life a lot easier.
Yeah, I suspect Michael Gerber's book is one of the other books in that list.
Oh, definitely. E-Myth Revisited, and I read it before it was revisited. But for years, I would read that every year over the Christmas holiday. That would be my schedule. I would remind myself of it every December, and just as I get ready for my annual planning for the coming year. But now Scaling Up is in there too, though, because I find a lot of value in the 4 pillars of Scaling Up too.
Yeah, it is. It's just too complex and too comprehensive for most small businesses to absorb. If you're doing less than $20 million in revenue, or you're not planning to be a unicorn type company, get to the middle market size company fast. It's a really difficult system for most people, but it's got a bigger tool set than EOS, and that's important. And Mike, here's why I wrote my book, because my book is kind of a mashup, if you will, of EOS and Scaling Up and another couple of other coaching systems that I put together along the way. But it was written for family businesses, because family businesses have some unique elements to them that are not addressed by either of these 2 books. And that is, there's an overlap of leadership members, management members, family members, and owners. And if you're going to have a clean, healthy, if you're going to have a healthy team, right? So read Lencioni's books, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. But if you're going to have a healthy family, you've got to take it to another level. You've got to be able to take family conversations that don't belong in the leadership team or management team meetings, and you need to take them offline. And some of them might be personal and they belong in the room, where you guys have dinner together as a family, or maybe not that room, but maybe a other conversation room. But then there's also ownership meetings, and those are not addressed by either of these books. And there's oftentimes overlap in the ownership and the family member. It could be 100% overlap, but it could be only 20% because in a multi generational family business, you might have family members that are owners that are not involved in the business. They don't even live in the same geography. And you need to address and speak to those people in a different forum. It would be inappropriate for them to walk into a leadership team meeting if they're a 20% or 10% owner, but are a silent partner. It would be inappropriate for them to walk in and talk about the issues. So I think that's one distinction that's really important. The other distinction, which I don't think either of the books address all too well, is how to have difficult conversations with family members or even key employees that are too valuable to lose, too expensive to keep. And you need to be able to have frank conversations because oftentimes in family businesses, you might have to talk to a family member about not being part of the business or about moving them into a role that they don't like or don't want. Or, you might have two siblings that have a rivalry and are vying for the CEO spot, but only one of them really is the best qualified. And if you believe, like I do, that only one person should be in the CEO seat, this co-CEO stuff is, for the most part, very difficult to manage. Unless, and you do have some such things like you do in your business where someone does the inside, someone does the outside, someone does the people thing, someone does the numbers thing. I mean, but there's a certain point in time where there's an overlap of people and numbers or inside and outside. And, who's the ultimate vote getter or, naysayer. So these are the complex things that happen in family businesses that they need to have a process for and need to understand where those different meetings should occur and what are the topics of them.
And yeah, and with it sounds like your book it's not an either or with the other ones. It's a both and that having whether it's traction or scaling up, but also then your book would help with those unique dynamics around having family, whether it's somebody you're married to or related to somehow, or those that all complement, and then we've got to have be on the same page, be willing to have, just like Five Dysfunctions of a Team, being able to have those challenging conversations and being frank and honest and open with each other about business is business, life is life, and we can do both of these together.
And most people who come to me to read my book or, get exposed to my podcast, they come because they realize there are issues in their family business. And, sometimes they could be, dad's really running the business, but I can see more and more he wants me to take over, but we haven't had these kind of conversations. Or dad still has a lot of the equity, 100% of the equity. I really would like to have a shot at getting some of the equity and like to have those conversations. And so that's the entree for people who are picking up a copy of my book, is to realize that they could be a successor, and to bring up these types of conversations could make them a bit of a disruptive successor because, no one wants to be ousted from their throne. And so while I bring in the concepts from EOS's traction and scaling up, I bring it up in the context of, so you have a family business, So you want to scale it. So now let's talk about what it's going to take to do that.
So yeah, let's talk about that term disruptive successor. Because certainly, I can see. In fact, I have a really pretty good friend whose dad built a pretty successful automotive repair business, but and dad convinced my friend to leave his successful career in IT to come take over the family business. But then dad never quite let go
Mm.
of the business. And so, what is that disruptive successor? What does that term mean? And what's the role that they really play in the future of the business?
Yeah, so I've taken some flack from older folks who own businesses and say, nobody wants a disruptive successor in their business. I mean, what are we talking about here? But what I'm trying to make the point of is that the rising generation, let's say they're mostly millennials, if they're going to scale a business 2 to 10x the current business, they're going to have to bring in some processes, some technology, and some people that are going to disrupt the current organization, the status quo, the methods that they're doing things with. Like technology, everyone can agree is somewhat neutral because it doesn't necessarily replace jobs right away in most businesses. But I mean, AI is coming. Robots are coming. They will replace some labor in certain companies, but the technology can be disruptive. If someone brings in an enterprise resource planning and management system, I mean, small businesses don't even know what that is for the most part. Many of them are still using grease boards with, erasable markers, and that's their technology. They don't have a fully scalable, fully mobile, uh, which is great with job costing and project management. So that can be somewhat disruptive to an older generation. But now let's talk about the fact that one of the key employees who's been around for 20, 30 years in the company, and suddenly he's not able to adapt to these new systems, and you're trying to coach him as the younger generation leader, and he's not really coachable. And you're now faced with, like, do I keep him, or do I tell mom and dad like he needs to go? Or, so this becomes very disruptive when you start talking about someone like that. Now let's take it to the next level and say, hey dad, like, you built a nice $2.5 million company. You and mom were making, $500,000 a year. You guys had a great net, but like, I can see this being a $30 million company. And what it's going to take is going to be a whole lot of work. And do you trust me to scale this business? And if you do, then, like, first of all, I'm going to want an increasingly bigger salary, and I'm going to want some say in what that salary and the compensation is. But I want equity. The real value is in the sale of this business, or whatever it's going to bring me. I don't want to build a company that's going to go from 2.5 to 30 million and not have a significant ownership stake if I'm the one who's the driving force. And that's disruptive as well. So these are what I'm talking about in disruptive successor.
So let's talk about that. So let's say family owned business and the first generation is running it, and they've decided to bring in family, kids, or nephews or whatever, some other family into the business. Um, how do you walk that line, or do you even worry about it, between with your existing employees that this is nepotism, this is you're bringing in this kid to tell us what to do, and you know and I'm being put in my place by somebody who may not even be qualified, at least in the eyes of the employees. How do you deal with those concerns around nepotism, that kind of stuff?
Carefully, number one. Transparently, number two. And, meaning, what I mean by transparently is like full communication. So you don't put your kid into a leadership position that he or she is not earned their qualifications. They'll be disrespected by the people who's who he stepped over. Like they might have been good for a promotion. So I would say to anyone, first, tell your kid to go out and get some experience in the outside world. Go work for a big company and learn how they do things there. Um, Work for a company. Maybe it's in a competitive company. Maybe it's in a different industry where you can learn some skills and bring it back to the company. Number one. Number two, if you don't do that and we start you because you're in high school and you're doing summer jobs, like you're going to have to do the gopher, the menial type jobs, and you're going to have to be willing to learn something and then move into something else. So move them from production and operations to sales, move them from sales to customer service, move them from customer service to a management role. I mean, like move them into different seats to see where their skills really are a good match, and explain to everyone, look, my son or my daughter, they're learning the business. I'd like you to mentor them. I'd like you to see it, you know give me some feedback and let's talk about how they did. And you need to tell your son or daughter, like, you know like you are just another employee here. You don't own the business. Yes, it's your family's business. Yes, you should tell me if you think people are doing things unethical, they're stealing, they're doing things wrong. You should come and report that to me, but don't act like you are entitled, because it's not your business. And so they need to learn the, you know, they need to learn what most any other employee would need to learn. And you also don't compensate that person above and beyond what normal compensation would be for that position. Okay, you want to give them a 5 or 10%, extra on the side. Okay, that's fine. When I say extra on the side, I mean pay them maybe 5 or 10% more than what that position is. But word will get out fast if you pay them significantly higher amount of remuneration for a job that isn't commensurate with it. So those are some of the things that I talk about in terms of being careful, and then also being transparent. Communicate. You know, my son's interested in the business. He's going to be working in this area. Once he learns that area, maybe going to move him into this other area. I want you guys to coach him. I want you to teach him. I want you to share with him and understand. He's 21 right now, but in 10 years, he might be the future boss running this business. And so please give him all the help that he needs. And if he's not finding you that helpful, I've told him he should come and talk to me and say, so and so is not really being very cooperative. So those are some of the things. I mean, this is just common sense, I think, to me, but it may not be common to other people. Common sense isn't that common, is what I
No,
mean.
that's yeah. Yeah. We wouldn't pay the premium we pay for it if everybody had it.
Right.
So if we don't have the next generation taking over the company, and what we're going to have to bring out, either bring in from outside or develop it internally, the next generation of leadership. Um, what does that look like for the these privately held companies, these owners who have invested? This is their baby, and they're getting it's this is they want to make sure their legacy is preserved or whatever. How do you see that working typically?
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is where maybe someone's brought in a CEO, COO, CFO level position. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's what I'm assuming you're talking about.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
brought into the C-suite, but they're not part of the family. They may be the only non-family member in that C-suite, and they have to have a pretty sober understanding that they're not the family. That maybe in 20 years, if everyone is working together, that they'll be treated as equal to a family member, and maybe it's 10 years, but that you're basically a hired gun. And so you should look at it as, what can I do to do a great job for this family? And also, what kind of a deal can I negotiate with the owners such that I share in the increase in value in the business? And so maybe that's phantom stock, that you get, or stock appreciation rights, SARs. There's got to be something, I think, that a C-suite level person is looking for beyond just the compensation. It's the same type of same type of situation as a private equity firm owning a business and putting in a C-level person as an advisor or as a person on the leadership team. They're looking for upside, and so negotiate that as near to the beginning of that position as possible.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. That's all the time we have today. I appreciate you being on Good Morning HR.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it as well, Mike.
And thank you for listening. You can find previous episodes, show notes, and contact info for our guests at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And please follow and rate us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, keep your chin up.